Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I'm Ruth Shelley, President of the Rotary Club of Portland. Welcome to our live weekly membership meeting. As you know, this year's theme for Rotary International is Rotary Opens Opportunities. Indeed, Rotary opens opportunities to find solutions for today's challenges, healing from the pandemic, recovery from the economic downturn, and peace building as we seek racial justice. This week, we opened door number 1, healing, as our speaker, Doreen Dodgen-Magee, helps us design a healthy post-pandemic life. But first, let's welcome Rotarian Andrew Rowe for our reflection. Andrew?
Unmute. Go. Well, good day, fellow Rotarians. I hope you're all doing well and enjoying our transition into springtime. As the weather gets nicer and we prepare for post-pandemic life, which I think we're going to be talking about today, my wish for each of you is that you're spending less time glued to your screens, reading emails and on Zoom calls like this, and more time outside watching the grass grow, flowers bloom, and engaging in outdoor activities. Most important, as you each get your vaccinations like I did, my hope is that you'll be able to increase your face-to-face connections. Yet, doing so is easier said than done. Between working from home these days, the Zoomification of American work and social life, the need for continued social distancing, and the continued onslaught of digital information that we face on all fronts, I think we run the risk of being held hostages to our screens well beyond the pandemic, distracted by all the noise and stuck in this new normal, which certainly I think is something that we all are at risk of unless we take some very purposeful action. Think about this. How often do you see a group of people at an event, even when you go to an event or in line for something or between activities, and notice that almost all of them have their faces glued to their cell phones? Or how often are we out to dinner with our loved ones or with a group of friends, even if we're distant, and we catch ourselves looking at our screens instead of actually talking to each other? Digital immersion and distraction is everywhere, and it's been exacerbated by this time that we've been coming through. Now, the distraction that our digital devices offer sometimes can be a good thing, no question. In fact, it's a great way to relax and allow our minds some rest periods between when we're trying to focus on things. But when distraction becomes the enemy of connection, deep conversation, and time to actually think and reflect, it's time for us to have a reset. And that time is now. So my challenge to you as we move into the spring and the reopening of our companies, our social gatherings, and the economy is this: set aside your devices, connect with those people who you care about, find meaning in your relationships and face-to-face conversations, slow down, notice what is happening around you, breathe, and experience life around you.
Thank you, Andrew. What a wonderful, timely message. And I'm going to pocket that word, Zoomification. Haven't heard it before, but it certainly is a danger. And if you'd like to volunteer to give the reflection as Andrew just did, Siobhan has the link in the chat, or you can email her directly. Now I'd like to ask that Rotarians who have invited a guest to raise their real or virtual hand, and Maria will call on you to unmute and introduce them. Or if you're a visiting Rotarian who came on your own, please raise your hand and introduce yourself, or let us know of your presence via the chat box. Maria, do you see any guests today?
I do. We have Rotarian Leslie Brunker with a guest. Leslie.
Hi, actually my guest is late, but he will be here. So I wanted to introduce him anyway, and when he gets here. His name is Lakiana Drury, and he's the founder and executive director of an organization called Word is Bond, which our Peace Builders Committee has collaborated with them on projects, and I invited him to join our club, and he's really interested in it, and he's interested in being part of the Peace Builders Committee. So And recently he was interviewed about Word is Bond on NPR. So they're getting some good, media attention. So anyway, welcome him when he gets here.
Will do. Anyone else, Maria?
Don't see anyone else flailing their hands at me, but if we have other guests, I will be sure to welcome them in the chat. Back to you, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you. And now it's April. I'd like to extend a happy birthday to everyone with birthdays this month. As you know, we alternate each week honoring birthdays and Rotary anniversaries. Please note the birthdays here. Reach out to wish all these wonderful people many happy returns. A big crop of spring babies. And if your birthday is today, you share your birthday with the painter Raphael, who was born in 1483, with James Watson, one of the discoverers of DNA, who was born in 1928, and the actor Billy D. Williams, who was born in 1937. So all of these people have notable birthday company. Congratulations to you all. And now, please welcome Rotarian Kurt Martig to announce the winner of March Madness, the 50-50 raffle. Sure, we were all glued to our screens last night. Kurt?
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, thank you. March Madness, the tournament concluded last night. Going into the night, we had two Rotarians vying for victory. We had Scott Burns and Rotarian Dick Wingard. Scott had the two teams playing were Gonzaga and Baylor. For those who didn't watch the game, Scott had picked Gonzaga and Dick had picked Baylor. Baylor decisively won, delivering victory to Dick Wingard. We had 24 total contestants, which raised us a quick and easy $240 for the club. I want to thank everyone who participated. We had some trials and tribulations with getting logged into the groups and all that kind of stuff, but we worked through it. Thank you for your patience. Do better next time. It'll be a lot, but it was a lot of fun. Thank you all. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kurt, for organizing this fun activity. Congratulations, Dick. Condolences, Scott. And we'll wait till next year. Now, please welcome one of our community grant recipients, Simon Fulford of Parrot Creek, to tell us about his organization and the use of the grant that we just awarded. Simon?
Well, thank you, Rotarians. I always enjoy coming to Rotary meetings, even by Zoom. It's much more fun in person. They're great events and you're wonderful people. So yeah, I'm Simon Fulford. I'm the Executive Director of Parrot Creek Child and Family Services. It is also my birthday today. So I will thank those lovely birthday wishes. And also, I guess I want to echo the theme that you sort of led with about care and connection, because that's very much obviously what Parrot Creek is all about. And it's actually, in short, also what your grant will help us create more of for the children and families in our programs. In real short form, Parrot Creek has been around since 1968. We were founded out in Oregon City. And at our core, we have 3 residential treatment programs for youth in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems. Pretty intensive programs for youth who have some challenging behaviors, some pretty high levels of trauma, and if you know of them, adverse childhood experiences. And so who have challenging behaviors where they can't be successful in their own homes or in foster homes. So we might work with them in treatment for 6 to 18 months, and then help them transition back to their own families, into independent living or into foster families. We have an outpatient behavioral health treatment program for youth with sexually inappropriate behaviors. And then we have an outreach program for family members, particularly young mothers who are struggling with substance misuse and are at very high likelihood of having their children temporarily removed from their care due to neglect. And we have outreach workers who engage with those parents, help them stabilize their lives, really kind of do a lot of hand holding into accessing treatment and rehabilitation, and either help them to not lose their children temporarily, or to meet the requirements of the courts and of their treatment so that they can then reunify with their kids. and hopefully go on to, successful independent lives. And we partner with True Housing to provide those women with supported housing once they've gone through reached the point of being clean and sober, and supporting them to reunify with their children, to practice their parenting skills, to gain employment or to preserve their employment, and then ultimately go on to permanent housing. So that's us in a snapshot, and there's a lot more depth to that. And the grant from the Rotary is helping us buy a new minivan that originally we thought of our minivans really just working with the youth in our residential programs. But a lot of the time the van will stay in that parking lot because the kids aren't going out every day. And we're looking much more broadly at how the minivans that we have can be used across our programs, to whether it is to take kids from our residential programs out on community outings, vocational tours with businesses in the community, sometimes medical appointments, but also because they're 15-seater vans, we can, not in COVID times, but we could take 2, 3, or 4 families out, and also work, use that as a resource to our community programs to get family members again out into community activities and events, to broaden their horizons. And so that is, we haven't bought the new van yet, but that's what your grant, once it was confirmed, that's what it's going towards.
That's wonderful news. Well, thank you, Simon, and happy birthday.
Thank you
You
very
have
much.
given us a gift in terms of realizing what good our donation will do with Parrot Creek. Congratulations again, and best wishes on your very important work.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to giving you an update when we have got the van and one of the first trips we took with kids or families.
That's super. Wonderful. And now, please welcome past president Rotarian Scott Burns, who has recovered from his loss and is ready to talk about this month's Committee of the Month, Preserve Planet Earth. Scott?
Thank you very much, President Ruth. And Kurt, thank you very much for running the big basketball thing. I was a winner, though, because I am a Stanford alum, and the Stanford women did win the national championship the day before. That was very exciting. And then, Andrew, thank you for the introduction today, too. As soon as this Zoom meeting is over, I'm going out and I water my new garden. So getting out away from this Zoom. This month, we are highlighting the Preserve Planet Earth Committee. And it was organized back in the early 1990s before I joined the club. And we have had many, many activities. And Siobhan's going to show you a little PowerPoint, what we do. So this was put together by Don Livingstone. So Don and I have been in the committee longer than anybody else. And so on the left-hand side, every year we would have a drive to recycle old computers and anything electronic. And we haven't done that for a couple of years. Other things, doing anything environmental. Top part, you can see spraying weeds in the Deschutes River, pulling blackberry vines out in West Lynn. And then one thing that we've been doing almost every year for the last 7 or 8 years is the Red, White, and Green wine tasting tour, and highlighting wineries that are environmentally conscious. One thing that we've been doing actually since the 1990s, and 2 weeks from now we will have a speaker, is the Environmental Achievement Award, and highlighting individuals and groups in the Portland area that have done things environmentally positive for us. We've done a lot of walks and hikes. On the right-hand side, field trip that we did to Bybee Lake in 2006. And then the next ones, let's see, there we go. We've taken geology tours up to Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, up the gorge, and to the coast. We also did tree planting, getting people outside, tree planting up in the Deschutes area. And then here is one of our early committees there, selecting the Environmental Achievement Award. And so 2 weeks from now, we will be doing that. We are not selecting a winner this year for the Environmental Achievement Award just because of COVID and everything like that. But once we get going again, we will be back giving this award that we have for many, many years. Thank you very much, President Ruth, and back to you.
Thank you, Scott. A good reminder, especially during this beautiful weather, to get outside and enjoy nature. And now we're going to disappear and enter a virtual table talk. Please introduce yourselves to the others in your group. And a minute or so before you come back to this main meeting, you'll get a visual heads up. You all never are at a loss for words, but I have a suggestion for a topic of discussion. What do you look forward to the most when we're back to a new normal after the pandemic? What do you look forward to the most? And a bonus round, if you want to build on Andrew's reflection, do you have any personal tips of how you control your addiction to screens? Here we go. And now on to our program. After our speaker today is finished, if you'd like to ask Doreen a question, Maria will moderate the Q&A through the chat box. And now, please welcome Rotarian Nancy Wenicky as today's chair of the day. Nancy?
Okay. Greetings, fellow Rotarians. Yeah, it's such a beautiful day out. It's hard to be inside on Zoom, but I'm very honored to introduce a dear friend and previous colleague, Dr. Doreen Dodgen-Magee, as our speaker today. She and I previously shared a wall for several years in our private practice office suite, as well as sharing a room on a pilgrimage group tour to Europe, including France, or Italy, France, Switzerland, for a number of days, on which day number 2, I fractured my ankle walking on the cobblestones to the Vatican. But I persevered. Anyway, as long as I've known her, she has been passionate about researching the latest cutting edge technology and its impact on our lives. She authored her first book by the name Devised, on balancing life and technology in a digital world, and is currently working on her forthcoming book focused on tending to our mental health and realigning our relationship with technology in a post-pandemic world. She's been featured in numerous journals and podcasts. In addition, she's presented throughout the country in numerous venues. I've been fortunate to experience several of her dynamic and engaging presentations, and I'm very much looking forward to her specific focus on today on moving forward into post-pandemic life. So please welcome Dr. Doreen Dodgen-Magee.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. I'm going to quickly share my screen with you all. Just one moment. Takes just a few steps here. There we go. Oh, it is so beautiful to be amongst people who care. And it's been really neat in this first few moments today to see some of you from the Community Peace Collaborative that I have seen over the years. And I just really respect and admire and honor the work that you all do. So I'm deeply honored to be with you all today. As just a little piece of background, as Nancy mentioned, I am a psychologist. I found myself traveling around the country, talking about the way in which technology is impacting our brains, our relationships, our sense of self, the way that we relate to our own selves and are able to emotionally regulate and live kind of these happy, content, and also very volunteer-rich lives. And I started about 7 years ago not being able to keep up anymore with requests for speaking. So I decided to pour myself into pulling all the research together and did write that first book, Devised, and was fortunate in that time to talk with almost 30,000 people over the course of 2 years and doing these anecdotal research circles, and then also digging deep into the academic and peer-reviewed research. And what I found is that that we were having a massive tsunami of impact in many facets of our lives that were being borne out in the research and in all of our daily kind of lived experience as a result of the way in which we were reorienting our relationship to being primarily here. You know, this is the most reliable and ever-present friend we can have. It will remember things for us better than our friends and colleagues or partners. And we really were becoming quite comfortable with all the ways in which it afforded us ease in life. And then the pandemic hit. And over the course of the first few months of the pandemic and the associated quarantine, I began seeing real themes happening. And in this time, I was working with a lot of businesses who were trying to migrate everything to technological circles, you know, those Zoom spaces and other video conferencing spaces. And at the same time, my volunteer work was keeping me really deeply connected to communities who did not have the same advantages or privileges as many of those businesses. My volunteer work leads me to lead healing circles with mothers in the South Side of Chicago who have lost children either to gun violence or incarceration. I also work with gun violence survivors across the country, many of whom are from Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And then my other volunteer work actually began to roll out with COVID Survivors for Change, which is one of the largest organizations in our country, working with those who have lost someone to COVID or who themselves have had COVID and faced loss as a result. And what I began to see is this huge divide. We had half of our, not only did we have, you know, political and kind of cultural upheaval, but we had half of our kind of populace in the United States kind of ready to go with technology so they could effectively migrate things. And we saw that portion of the population dig deeper into technological dependence. We became much more comfortable using our devices and our technology for more things, and our lives in some ways, while we felt the real sting of the loss of connection, became easier and more convenient, right? Because we could have everything delivered. We could do several things at once. We could, you know, go to a meeting at work while we were doing our daily walk. And then yet for this other half of the population who didn't have access to really robust technology or reliable internet, we saw them really facing a lot of kind of feelings of lack and reality of lack, while at the same time feeling as though they were sort of falling behind. And so as a result of working with all this over the course of the last 9 months, middle of January, I had this, you know, epiphany as people were beginning to become vaccinated of how complex this issue is going to be of re-entering embodied life. We have adapted in some ways that have been incredibly probably convenient and healthy to being closed in at home and kind of in this quarantine space. But we have also developed some habits that are less than adaptive for healthy and happy and content and kind of energetically life-giving lives. So what I've done is, what I did was over the course of the next 6 weeks, I wrote a book, pitched it, got a contract. But what that has done is helped me be able to kind of coalesce a lot of what we are knowing from the emerging research about how this time has impacted us and what we might need to do as we think about how to re-enter. You know, I'm sure many of you, even in just our last little table talk time, heard, you know, we are all in very different places. And once we are vaccinated, there's this feeling of kind of anticipation and excitement about going out and being a part of a more connected world again. And yet what we also know, and what the world of psychological research and sociological research is telling us, is that there are going to be a lot of emotional and relational complexities. Not everyone is going to be on the same page. And another thing that we know is that we are all severely out of practice with in-person experiences and also with the kind of novel experiences that life hands us. And as a result, many of us are approaching this time of restarting from a period of real exhaustion. I wish I could see all of you right now so I could have you nod. Like, anybody else feel a little bit tired? I hear all the time. And I liken it to, you know, the fact that new parents are having to do the hardest job of their lives, raise an infant at a time where they have the least sleep, the least access to things like exercise and community because they're taking care of a baby, right? We are all going to be asked to take care of this new, beautiful, wonderful, anxiety-provoking, terrifying, exciting opportunity for kind of what I'm thinking of as a do-over at the exact time where we have maybe some of the most unhealthy habits in place and the least energy that we've ever had. So I've just coalesced the information today to bring you 5 ways that you can begin to think about how you might design a really healthy and thriving post-pandemic life. And the first one that we just have to really think about is that we need to take some deliberate time. And I would encourage you right now, if you have a piece of paper with you, to jot this down. And also my screenshot or my slides are made very simple, so you can take screenshots of them if you would like. But I would encourage you to mark down a time on your calendar where you can spend 30 minutes to an hour really identifying the habits that you kind of established early on in the pandemic, and think about the way in which those habits align with your values or do not align with your values. You know, one of the things that we have had to value during the pandemic is really thinking about social isolation as a way of keeping our communities safe. That may not be in keeping with your values. Your value may be to be out and about in the community. However, the habit that we have created has meant that we have lacked practice in social interaction. And we know that things like social anxiety and in-person communication was really taking a hit. Well, social anxiety was on the rise, and the comfort with in-person communication was taking a hit prior to the pandemic. And we know that that is only more so the case now. So we want to help you, and I'm happy to send you, if any of you want to email me after this, I'm happy to send you the values list from the upcoming book and things like that that can help you begin to look at, okay, so I've started the habit of, let's say, rolling out of bed and getting dressed on the top half only and sitting down in front of my screen for a meeting, you know. Does that really go with the value that I have of being a person who shows up in the world? Maybe I have, you know, created the habit of having everything delivered to myself, and I also feel a sense of social anxiety. Well, maybe we want to take a look at that, and we want to think about how can you create small opportunities for some social practice by doing things. If you are vaccinated and you still wear a mask to protect others who aren't, maybe going to the store every once in a while so that you can just have that small interchange and exchange of conversation. The second thing, after you've done that kind of, you know, looking over the habits you've created and deciding if they're healthy or not, would be to think about, of the unhealthy habits that you have kind of leaned on during pandemic to get by, what of those do you primarily need to think about breaking? What are the things that are going to be harder to do? You know, making space for getting ready in the morning, or making space for a drive to see a friend rather than always having it only be text communication. And as we break those habits, which is really hard to do, we want to think about putting healthy norms in place. One of my favorite sayings that just came out of my mouth once at a talk, but has really stuck, is that it's always easier to establish healthy norms than it is to break bad habits. You know, ask somebody who has a bad habit that they don't love if they would have preferred never to have started it or to try to stop it. And they will always tell you, I'd prefer to never have started it, right? Well, we are being given this beautiful opportunity to enter lives with some new norms in place. And I think some of these new norms are that, you know, we have gotten to experience, maybe not because we chose it, but we've gotten to experience a little bit of a slower pace. And I think people are feeling a little bit like, how do I maintain some of that? Because it feels a little more healthy than our frantic pace that we lived in before. But we need to think about what norms we're going to put in place in order to make those lasting changes. And norms are just normative behaviors that help us kind of move through life. Habits make life easier for us because it means we don't have to think about them. So let's say we have a habit of drinking a glass of wine when we're really totally overwhelmed, right? Well, that habit prevents us from finding other ways that we might be able to bring ourselves down and bring ourselves to a state of calm and centeredness. So a norm would be, I'm going to take 3 minutes to do a little meditation and take 3 or 4 deep breaths before I go pour that glass of wine, just so that I can center myself a little bit before I do it in medicinal ways. So that's just an example. One of the biggest habits that we have all adapted to in this time is that of multitasking. And again, if I could see you all, I'd be asking you to show me your hands if you've become an excellent multitasker. This is the one that just I hear about over and over and over. And the tricky thing is, we know, and we knew prior to the pandemic, that multitasking is actually quite a thief of our sense of well-being and our sense of efficacy in completing tasks. We know that multitasking is positively correlated with less effective follow-through, with less than sufficient task completion, and that it actually isn't a skill that helps us. Instead, it is actually a very fancy word of saying that we are distracted. When we feel like we're multitasking, what we're actually doing is distracting our brain from a task that we're doing in front of us and putting it on another task, and then pulling the distraction from that to the other thing and back and forth. And in the research, they call this task switching. And what's really interesting to me is that in the research around technology, they say that task switching is one of the positive traits that we develop as a result of using a lot of tech. This to me feels a lot like saying, I'm a really good smoker because I smoke a lot. So do we really want to be really good at task switching when task switching is this thing that actually lowers our sense of satisfaction in life? It lowers our the effectiveness with which we approach life. So if you only have energy to do one thing as you think about how you re-enter your life, I would encourage you to be thinking about, how can I really come back to a value of being fully present, not being always distracted, of completing tasks with a sense of relative focus, of being very available with my own personal agency to whatever I offer my hand to and to whomever I am with. This is a huge one, both in our tech lives and now in our everyday life. The third thing is that we need to take some time to really acknowledge the complexity of the task ahead of us. I have frequently said during this time of quarantine that we are in a marathon, not a sprint. You know, we entered the pandemic and the quarantine feeling like we just had to find some compensatory ways of making life work. And we got pretty good at it pretty quickly. The reality is, however, that this has been a marathon with an ever-changing end line. And we see that even now, that as we see this great successful rollout of vaccines, we're also seeing this resurgence of, really high numbers of diagnostic positives and also deaths in certain parts of the world and the country. And so we need to understand that we ourselves are at somewhere near the finish point of a marathon, but that finish point keeps getting moved out. And as a result, we are exhausted. And if you think about trying to step out and encounter people in the world and encounter life in a different way at mile 20 of a marathon, you would realize you're probably not going to be feeling so great and have all the energy that you wish you had. And everyone that you are going to be encountering is the same. We need to be aware of this because we may be very comfortable meeting people out and about for a gathering. They, however, may not be. And we need to be aware of oh yes, this is complex. I don't need to judge those other people for their lack of willingness, or I don't want to be judged, but I need to be able to assert what I need in this space and also allow others to have the kinds of personal agency and decision-making skills that they want and need. A big, huge help in this, and this came out over and over and over in my research for this book, is that our ability to communicate has taken a real hit during this time. Again, not only because we've just had a lack of people to practice with and a lack of normal social opportunities to have that practice within, but also because we have faced some real things as a global community and for us in the US as a national community that have deeply split and divided us. And so again, we are going to be re-entering these spaces not really having a full picture of where we ourselves are in terms of our own emotional regulation, our own comfort in physical spaces, and our own sense of kind of flexibility and capability with communication skills, but we also don't know that about the others. So the biggest thing that we can do to just do a quick improve of our communication skills is to get comfortable pausing. And all I mean by that is when we step out into the world and we start to have these encounters again, if something hits us as really strong and we find ourselves really reactive, to just take a moment, take a deep breath in. Let's all do this together right now through our noses, exhaling out through our mouths, and feeling a sense of groundedness, that we have come through this year of constantly changing all the time, constantly changing news, information, flooding our systems, and that it's okay when we want to communicate with ourselves to take a pause, to get ourselves grounded so that we can really be truthful with ourselves. Am I feeling reactive? Am I feeling anxious about encounters? Am I feeling exhausted? And if so, what can I do to speak to my own emotional dysregulation in such a way that I can come to new opportunities fresh? The other thing about this is that it is so important to be thinking about being kind to everyone. This is a saying by an old Irish kind of mystic: be kind to everyone, for theirs is a difficult journey. One of the things that I think is going to be really prominently happening over the course of the next few months, and we in Oregon have been so fortunate, our death rate has been so much lower than other parts of the country, but we will be encountering people who have lost loved ones or personal function to COVID. And these folks have faced a certain kind of stigma in this time. And as we all kind of have COVID, we're kind of fading into the background for us as we move forward into life, those folks are likely going to be left with a lot of strong feelings and feeling a little bit left behind. So it's especially important to be aware and to make yourselves aware of the kind of losses people have felt. There's a very famous TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And the author of that talk talks about she came to the US for college from Nairobi, and her roommate had only one story of Africa. And that story of Africa was that it was, full of tribes that didn't speak English and that, were very kind of poverty stricken. And that really impacted her ability to connect with her roommate because that one story dominated her language. And all of us have primarily one story of COVID, our own story of what it was like for us. And if we re-enter assuming that everyone's time of COVID was like that, we will really miss the mark in terms of re-entering with health and integrity in place. And then finally, I want to encourage everyone to take this opportunity, this restart, this do-over, to really think about realigning our relationship with technology. We know that prior to the pandemic, the average American over the age of 15 was spending 12.5 hours a day with screens. I know that sounds really drastic, but the research is very clear. And the way that researchers get to that statistic is that if we are multitasking with our devices, meaning we're on our laptop watching, or maybe we're working on a paper, but we've got our phone playing a podcast, or we're watching a movie on our flat screen and we're texting on our tablet. If you do that behavior with two different devices for 1 hour, the researchers really feel that they have to code that as 2 hours because the load on the brain is so profound. Basically, with screen-based stimulation, what happens is that the brain is overloaded in two regions of the brain, which we don't have time, I could do a whole 6-hour talk on how technology impacts the brain, but basically technology stimulates the left hemisphere of the brain and the bottom hemisphere of the brain, meaning that we have overly kind of wired these two regions of the brain. And that means that we have pruned off or underwired the right and upper regions of the brain. The reason that this is a difficulty for us is that the upper right parts of the brain are the parts of the brain that allow us to emotionally regulate, to come back to a sense of calm. They also have the centers of the brain that let us communicate communicate effectively with other people. They are the centers that are involved in empathy formation and starting and stopping behaviors, being able to stop something that isn't helping us, are all located up in this right upper region of the brain. And when we have underwired it, it means that we literally show less capability. There's some research out there that shows that when an individual, and the research happened to be or play out randomly, that an average or typical white man between the age of 35 and 65 shows a 10-point IQ drop when they are listening to something, like being present in a meeting online and texting or writing an email at the same time. So the researcher said, tell your audience that if they are attending a business meeting online and also trying to write an email at the same time, they might as well let their 8-year-old child write it for them. It's kind of sad, right? But if you think about it, we are all, these trees, and a tree is largely dependent on the seed that was planted, but also the health of a tree is dependent upon a lot of contextual elements, the sun and the light, the minerals in the soil, the water in the soil, the nutrients in the soil. And if you think about trees, let's say at the Oregon coast, where the coastal winds have blown over them and they kind of, end up bent. That is what's happening for all of us. We are being profoundly impacted by the way in which the digital winds and the technological reality has blown over us over the course of the last 20 years, specifically over the course of the last year. And where the research shows the most decay and the most pruning of our healthy tree selves is in our ability to focus on one thing at a time, without being distracted or without having our attention pulled away, our ability to delay tending to distractions, meaning if we hear a text come in, can we not check it? Or do we always, distract ourselves away from what we're doing to check it? And then our ability to be emotionally regulated, meaning we can be grounded and calm, we can handle disagreements, we can handle difficult situations and distress without facing psychological distress. So if you think about the fact that we have really impaired our ability to focus, our ability to delay, and our ability to regulate, this takes away 3 of the things that will help us restart our lives well. So I want to encourage you to just take a few steps as you think about how to design that post-pandemic life, specifically thinking about how to improve your focus, how to improve your ability to delay, and improve your ability to emotionally regulate. As much as you can, as you think about and prepare for re-entering embodied life, try to migrate yourself away from the forms of technology that have constant tech loops or suggestions. A radical act in this realm would be watching 1 episode of your favorite show at a time, not binging on 6 at the same time, or letting your video feed just constantly populate. Just stopping that loop some of the time. Really migrating away from fast-paced content. This would be first-person shooters or even racing games. Move towards strategy games that are a little bit more slower if you're a video game player. If you are constantly doing 2 or 3 things with 2 or 3 devices, stop and use only 1 device at a time. And then really trying to migrate away from monetized content. Our devices and the digital domains that they direct us to now are built on what's called a hidden curriculum. And that hidden curriculum is really using ways that they create the platforms to keep us engaged and to keep us from looking out and about. So some of the time, stepping away and actively leaving your device behind is important. In terms of away from technology, how can you make some steps to prepare to realign your life? The first one is just to practice some simple self-soothing skills. We are going to need these. We are going to be faced with situations that lead us to feel stressed and overwhelmed all the time. I would encourage you to check out, I'll put in the chat when we're done, the Mindfulness Awareness Resource Center at UCLA. They have some very amazing 3-minute meditations you can practice. Even just a few of those deep breaths we did, smelling the roses, so inhaling through the nose and breathing out through the mouth can be helpful. On my website, I have some meditations as well and some tools and tips for how to do self-soothing. You could check there. Another thing to do is just to really think about unitasking. Some of the time doing only 1 thing at a time. That means if you're washing dishes, you're only washing dishes. You're not listening to a podcast. If you're on a walk, you're only walking. You're not listening to music. But some of the time, giving ourselves the opportunity to come back to ourselves. Give yourself some opportunities to practice in-person skills, whether that be masked and distanced, but sometimes going to the store in safe ways or having a distanced gathering with someone. It is the energetic load of in-person connections is going to be very draining on us at the start. So making sure that we are ready for that. And then finally, sometimes privilege boredom. Sometimes, so the work I was doing right before the pandemic was called Welcome to My Boredom Party. And it was all about how to get comfortable, because boredom and the ability to tolerate it is actually positively correlated with creativity, with feelings of contentment and satisfaction in life, as well as increased satisfaction in relationships. So some of the time, be bored. So here's just that list in a 5-point layouts if you want to take a screenshot of that. But I think if we all were to do these 5 things, we would have a much better chance of re-entering and of designing a life that we can move forward in a way that really capitalizes on the beauty that is involved in being human and being human within community. These are ways that you can reach me if you would like, and I invite you, anybody, to email or reach out at any time. The book is available for pre-sale, hopefully coming out in the next couple of months on all those sites. And I will stop sharing my screen for questions and answers.
Thank you so very much, Doreen. We're going to move into our Q&A with you here shortly. Just as a reminder, Rotarians, if you have a question for Doreen today, please raise your electronic blue hand or put a little note to me in the chat and I'll call on you and put you in the queue. We have our first question from Lakiana. Lakiana, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Let me unmute myself there. I just want to say, really enjoyed the presentation. I just had one thing. I just was trying to catch what you said at the end. You said boredom privilege. Was that what you were?
Yeah. Privilege boredom. So like privileging, taking opportunities to make sure that we, each of us, are capable of being bored. You know, does that address what you?
Yeah. Yep.
So the way I think about it is, you know, Laura Ingalls just had to be bored like a lot of the time, you know, just like walking along behind the wagon, right? And as a result of that, she developed it, and we all developed over the course of our lives, a lot of creativity, a lot of flexibility, a lot of being able to be attuned to her own self and those around her. And anymore, we live in a world where we never, ever, ever have to be bored. You know, when I was growing up, the TV just went off at midnight, right? And we only had 3 channels all day. Now we can watch entertainment 24 hours a day. We can, when we're in line, we're, you know, glued to our phones. So anytime that we can create the opportunity for nothingness, the Dutch, I love this phrase, the Dutch call it niksen, which is Niksen, and that translates to doing nothing deliciously. And that is so correlated with a sense of satisfaction in life and a sense of coming back to center. So that's what I mean when I say that. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you for the answer. I really appreciate the presentation.
Doreen, our next question comes from President Ruth Shelley. Ruth.
Doreen, thank you so much for those 5 tips. They're very actionable, but they're also very much centered on what we can do ourselves. And many of us are in relationship with a partner or a spouse. We're in relationship with children, or we're in relationship with employees who may be demonstrating some of this technological dependency. Do you have any tips of how to be in relationship with people who may not be managing their relationship with technology successfully? How do you navigate those waters?
That is such a good question. And it is such a hard question because part of what has happened is there is, as in so many places of our lives, there is kind of a deep chasm between people who really embrace all forms of technology and maybe overuse it for what some of us would think, and then those who feel as though they have their relationship with it a little more squared away. So the trickiest part is to begin to think about ways of having complex conversations in non-shaming ways, and that is so hard to do. But usually people are quite sensitive about their relationship with their technology. And so if they feel at all shamed or as though, you know, we are coming toward them from kind of this position of authority, they will shy away. So I always suggest starting with personal kind of admission. So I start every talk when I'm talking about technology. I start every talk at a university or high school literally by getting on my knees and asking for their forgiveness, because I feel like my generation has handed them this gorgeous thing that is shiny and amazing, and then done nothing but talk smack about them for using it. And so I literally want to ask for their forgiveness and say, I want to do this differently. And then from there, I always start by saying, I want to know what your device, what your device delivers to you that's meaningful. I want to understand. Can you help me understand? Can we have a really good conversation where I work hard not to be judging, and you can feel accepted, but you can share with me what feels so compelling so that I can understand it more. And what I find is that when we can do that with our partners and our children, suddenly they feel invited to the table and that conversation can begin. It takes a long time and it is very difficult. And if this is a relationship with children, I think one of the things that we most have to do a lot of times, it can be very easy for parents or grandparents to get very fixated on telling children or adolescents or young adults, no, get off that thing, get off that thing, get off that thing. Number one, while we ourselves are constantly on that thing. And number two, we say a lot of no's, but we don't offer alternatives. And so if we aren't offering these kind of edgy, what I call fiery experiences and offerings in our house, like I have a room where people can write on the walls with Sharpies. I have toys all over my house, even though I don't have young children here. I have bins of Legos and bowls of kinetic sand and, just lots of things to touch and feel. If we don't offer those things, people, our partners, our children will always find that exciting stuff online, always. It's so easily accessible there. So it's up to us to doing the uncomfortable work of kind of creating those opportunities and being flexible enough to host them in our homes and offices. I hope that
Extremely helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have our last question is from Rotarian Patsy Feeman. Patsy.
Thanks, Doreen. I'm kind of on the flip side of Ruth's question. I see that my habits, I get so swept away by my habits that at the end of the day, I go, oh, I forgot what are some non-technology practices or support that I can put, in place to help me remind myself that I'm being swept away.
I love that. I love that question. You can set your router at home to turn off at certain times a day. So literally you can't get online. That's an extreme measure. But you can also set an alarm to put it down. Let's say I'm going to put my phone down at 7 and then to do maybe just a 5 sense scan. Let me think of something I can smell right now, something I can feel, the air on my skin, something that I can taste, and something that I can touch. So just engaging your senses. Also setting your home up so that all of your home isn't tailored, or your office, to screens. So literally having one room in your house where screens don't go, where there are also some of these things, like maybe you put an Etch-a-Sketch out on the coffee table, or if you love to color, some coloring pencils and paper, or a little water feature that makes the sound of water, or you put an essential oil diffuser. But things that stimulate our senses will force us away from our screens because they're novel and because we have understimulated them. So that's the way I would encourage you to do that. Maybe you set your alarm and you tell yourself, no matter what you're doing at 6 o'clock when that alarm goes off, your phone goes in the kitchen and you stretch for 3 minutes. But once we separate ourselves a little bit from our devices and engage our senses, we're much more likely to keep engaging our senses because it will feel gratifying in some ways.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. I also have on my website and in the first book, list after list after list of these kinds of things that you can do in your homes. And I'm happy to pull that out and email that to you too. I will put my email address in the chat.
Thank you, Doreen. Wonderful. And thank you all for the thoughtful questions. Next week, our speakers yet to be determined, but this meeting will once again be live via Zoom at noon on Tuesday. And certainly, if you have a speaker idea, you can submit them on our website. Siobhan will put the link in the chat. I want to thank our virtual guest today, Lakiana. Welcome. We're so glad you could join us, and thank you for your question. Andrew, thank you for your timely reflection. Kurt, thanks for running our March Madness. And Dick, congratulations on your win. Scott, thanks for your overview of the Planet Earth Committee. And Nancy, thank you for your speaker introduction. Doreen, thank you again for your fascinating presentation. I have a 20-something daughter that I'm going to have a conversation with, and you gave me some ideas of how to do that. And as we enter into a new Rotary week, please join me in opening the doors of opportunity for healing, for recovery, and for peace building. As Rotarians, we're here to make our world healthier, more sustainable, and with justice for all. Have a good week, everyone. This meeting is adjourned. Bye-bye.